Did you know that there are POW camps for American and British soldiers in China? Let me take you to this historical site. The destination is Shenyang, the largest city in northeastern China. Upon landing at the airport and heading into the city, I was greeted by plenty of snow and a bustling crowd. Our guide handed out bottled water from the Yolu River brand, and perhaps it was just my mood, but the water tasted quite refreshing. The place one arrived at was the Shenyang World War II Allied Prisoners Camp Museum. The Second World War was an unprecedented catastrophe initiated by the German, Italian, and Japanese fascists, which involved Europe, Asia, Africa, and the vast areas of the Atlantic, Pacific and Indian Oceans. More than 2 billion people in the world were thrown into the war, with over 50 million lost their lives. On December 7, 1941, Japan launched a sneak attack on Pearl Harbor, the US naval base on the Pacific Ocean. Marking the outbreak of the Pacific War, in the early stage of the war, the Allied forces suffered setbacks, and a large number of soldiers were captured by the Japanese Army, POWs. To imprison and enthrall the prisoners of war, Japan set up more than 200 POW camps on its homeland, as well as occupied land overseas. In that period, Japan violated relevant international conventions about the treatment of POWs and ruthlessly tormented them both physically and mentally, causing a high death rate. Originally named Mukden POW Camp, the Shenyang POW Camp of World War II Allied Force was a central POW camp established by the Japanese Army in the northeast of China. It is headquartered in Shenyang with 2 branches in the cities of Shuangliao and Laoyuan, Jilin Province. From November 1942 to August 1945, more than 2,000 POWs from the United States, Britain, Canada, Australia, Holland, France, and other countries were imprisoned there. With prisoners in this camp featured the most nationalities, highest rank, and largest number. The Shenyang POW Camp of World War II Allied Force is a typical representative of the POW camps founded by Japan during World War II. In the early stage of the Pacific War, the Allied forces suffered major setbacks because the United States, Britain, and other countries implemented the strategy of Europe first, Asia second. As a result, the Japanese Army occupied a slew of countries and regions from December 1941 to May 1942, including Thailand, Hong Kong, Malaya, Singapore, Myanmar, the Philippines, Dutch East Indies, the Guam and the Wake Island. A large group of officers and men in the Allies' forces became captives of the Japanese Army. On April 9, 1942, after making every effort possible to fight against the Japanese Army, the more than 70,000 officers and men of the US and Philippine Allied forces on the Bataan Island gave up resistance and were captured by Japanese Army. On April 10th, the Japanese Army drove the captives on the O'Donnell POW camp in the middle of Luzon Island, thus starting the appalling Bataan Death March in history. During that march, nearly 30,000 Allied forces POWs died from the atrocities inflicted by the Japanese Army. On October 7, 1942, the Japanese Army selected nearly 2,000 Allied forces POWs from the O'Donnell POW camp and put them onto Tori Maru, the Chinese Hill ship, which set off from Manila Bay and sailed for more than a month to arrive in Mukden, today's Shenyang. In order to meet the needs of war, Japan implemented the policy of sustaining the war by means of war. When Japanese Army's military-industrial complex in Mukden gradually enlarged production, the shortage of labour emerged as an urgent problem. Thus, Japan decided to use Allied forces POWs from the Pacific Front having special skills as labour forces to meet the labour demand of the military-industrial complex under the control of the Japanese Army. On November 11, 1942, the first group of Allied forces POWs arrived at Mukden and was put into the temporary barracks of Mukden POW camp in 1943. In order to make it easier to control and use the POWs, the Japanese Army built a new POW camp, the headquarters of Mukden POW camp, covering an area of early 50,000 square meters. In the late period of the Pacific War, Japanese arms was defeated in all battlefields, so the headquarters of the Japanese Army developed a new strategic system according to the war situation and adjusted the policy towards POWs so that the Allied forces POWs, who were imprisoned in POW camps around the Southeast Asia and in the south and of Japan itself, were gradually moved to the inner land of Japan and the Northeast China. At the same time, the dispatched camps and subcamps of Mukden POW camp were established successively in Northeast China. The first group of Allied forces POWs arriving at Mukden POW camp were mainly from American force who surrendered in the fall of Bataan Peninsula, and a small number of POWs were British soldiers captured in the War of Defending Singapore. During the nearly 3 years from November 11, 1942 to August 1945, the number of POWs changed frequently. During the late period of W2, the Japanese Army transferred a large number of senior Allied forces, POWs, to Shenyang. The POWs held in Shenyang POW camp of World War II. Allied force were mainly from 6 countries, namely America, Britain, Canada, Australia, Netherlands and France, up to over 2,000 people at its peak. The barracks of the POW camp were very bumble, and the food supply and medical equipment were in great shortage. Moreover, the Japanese army forced the Allied forces POWs into slave labor beyond their strength, which was a grave breach of Geneva Convention relative to the treatment of prisoners of war jointly signed by Japan and other countries, causing a large number of the Allied forces POWs died from serious physical and mental abuses.